If you've ever laid awake wondering whether the person who keeps pulling away actually feels something real for you, or whether you're just imagining it because you want it to be true, I need you to listen to me for the next few minutes, because I'm about to tell you the one sign that actually means something, not the fake signs, not the signs your friends tell you to look for because they read them in a meme. The real one. The one that avoidant attachment research and years of coaching couples through exactly this pattern keeps confirming over and over again. Before I tell you what it is, I want you to understand something about avoidant partners that almost nobody explains properly. And it's this: avoidants are not emotionless. I know that's the story you've been told. I know it feels that way sometimes when they go quiet on you for 3 days after a good weekend together, or when they suddenly need space right after things start feeling close. It feels like you're dealing with someone who simply doesn't have the same depth of feeling that you do. But that's not actually what's happening underneath the surface. What's happening is that closeness itself triggers something in them. It's not that they don't feel it. It's that feeling it scares them, and the fear shows up as retreat. This matters because it changes the entire question you should be asking. The question isn't, does this person have feelings for me? Most of the time, if you're even in this situation, they do. The real question is, what does this person do with those feelings when they show up? And that's where the one sign I'm about to give you comes in. Because it's not about whether they say the right things or send you good morning texts every day. It's about what they do in the moment right after they've pulled away. Here it is. The single sign that tells you an avoidant partner actually wants to stay, more than almost anything else you could look for, is this: they come back on their own without being chased. And they come back with more effort than before, not less. I want to slow down on that because it's easy to hear it and nod and move on. But the weight of that sentence is actually the whole video. Let me break it into its two parts because both parts matter. And if you only take one of them, you'll misread the signal. The first part is that they come back on their own, not because you texted them first, not because you sent the, "Hey, just checking in" message that you convinced yourself was casual, but that both of you knew was really asking, "Are we okay?" Not because you showed up somewhere you knew they'd be. On their own. That means somewhere inside their own head, without any pressure from you, they made a decision. They thought about you. They felt whatever discomfort or fear made them pull away in the first place. And they chose to move toward you anyway. That's not nothing. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, that is actually one of the hardest things they can do, because their entire nervous system is often wired to associate closeness with a loss of self, and choosing to close that distance on their own means they're fighting their own wiring for you. This is the part where I need to be honest with you, because I'm not interested in giving you false comfort. If the only way they ever come back to you is because you reached out first, that's not this sign. That's a different pattern entirely. And I'll talk about what that pattern usually means later in this video, because I don't want you walking away thinking every reach out from an avoidant is proof of love. It isn't. Context matters enormously here, and I'll give you the context. The second part of the sign is what separates a real signal from a false one, and it's this: when they come back, the effort increases, not decreases. This is the part most people miss because they're so relieved that the person is back in contact at all that they don't notice what's happening underneath. An avoidant partner who is genuinely losing interest, who's pulling away because they've quietly decided this isn't for them, will still sometimes come back. They'll still text you. They'll still show up. But when you look closely, the effort is thinner every time. The texts get shorter. The plans get vaguer. The conversations feel like maintenance, like they're keeping a door cracked open just in case, not because they actually want to walk back through it. But an avoidant partner who is coming back because something in them genuinely doesn't want to lose you, that person shows up differently. They ask more questions, not fewer. They initiate plans instead of waiting for you to suggest something. They bring up something you mentioned 3 weeks ago that you didn't think they were even listening to. They apologize, even if it's clumsy and awkward, and doesn't sound like the apology you'd get from someone securely attached, because avoidants are often terrible at apologizing in the traditional sense. But the apology is there in some form, even if it's just, "Sorry I went quiet, work got weird," when you both know work isn't really what happened. I want to give you a real example here because I think it'll make this land better than just talking in the abstract. I worked with a client, I'll call her Rachel, who was seeing a man for about 4 months, who ran hot and cold in a way that was making her feel like she was losing her mind. Good weekend together, then 4 days of almost nothing. She'd ask what was wrong, he'd say nothing was wrong, and then he'd disappear a little more. Classic pattern. And if you're watching this, I'd bet a lot of you are nodding right now because you've lived some version of exactly this. Here's what changed things. And it wasn't anything Rachel did directly. It was something she stopped doing. She stopped chasing the reconnection. Not out of strategy at first, honestly, just out of exhaustion. She was tired of being the one who always closed the gap. And in the silence that followed, something happened that she wasn't expecting. He reached out first, not with a generic "hey" text either. He asked her about something specific, a work presentation she'd mentioned being nervous about the week before, something she genuinely didn't think he'd remembered. And then he asked if she wanted to grab dinner that week, his idea, his initiation. Now, here's the important part, because I don't want you thinking this story ends with, and then everything was perfect forever, because that's not how this works, and I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it is. What it meant was not that all his avoidant patterns disappeared overnight. They didn't. He still needed space sometimes. He still occasionally went quiet when things got emotionally heavier than usual. But what it told Rachel accurately was that this wasn't a man who was quietly checked out. This was a man whose nervous system pulled him away sometimes, but whose actual feelings pulled him back on his own with more effort than before. That's the sign. That's what it looks like in real life, not in theory. Now let's talk about why this sign matters more than almost any other sign people obsess over. Because I know a lot of you are sitting there with a list of other signals you've been tracking. Does he still follow me on social media? Does she still like my posts? Did he leave the relationship on read for a certain number of hours versus days? I understand why you track these things, genuinely, because uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable emotional states a human being can be in, and your brain is trying to find some kind of data point that gives you certainty. But most of those signals are noise. They don't tell you anything about the internal decision-making happening inside an avoidant person's head. They just tell you about behavior that could mean 5 different things depending on 10 different variables you don't have access to. What makes coming back on their own with more effort different is that it requires an internal shift that can't really be faked casually. Someone who has truly emotionally checked out of you does not, generally speaking, increase effort after a period of distance. It takes energy to increase effort. It takes intention. It takes overriding whatever discomfort made them pull away in the first place. People don't do that for someone they don't care about because there's no incentive to. If they want it out, the path of least resistance is just letting the distance widen. Staying quiet is easy. Coming back with more effort is not easy. And that's exactly why it means something when it happens. I also want to address something that I think trips a lot of you up, and it's the difference between an avoidant partner coming back because they miss you and an avoidant partner coming back because their own anxiety about losing you kicked in. These can look almost identical from the outside, and I want to help you tell them apart because they lead to very different long-term outcomes. An avoidant partner who is coming back because they genuinely miss you tends to bring warmth with them. There's an ease to how they show up. They're not performing. They're not over-explaining themselves. They're just there, a little softer than before, a little more present. And it feels less like they're trying to convince you of something, and more like they simply wanted to be near you again. An avoidant partner who is coming back because they're afraid of losing you, but hasn't actually done any internal work on why they keep pulling away in the first place, often shows up with a kind of urgency that feels slightly off. It can look like a lot of attention very suddenly, almost overcorrecting, followed by the same withdrawal a few weeks later once the fear of loss has faded and the discomfort of closeness creeps back in. This is the hot and cold pattern that so many of you are painfully familiar with, and I don't want you mistaking a fear-based return for a genuine one, because they will feel similar in the first 48 hours and then diverge completely after that. The way you tell them apart is time and consistency, not the return itself. One return, even a warm one, isn't proof of anything on its own. What you're looking for is whether the increased effort holds. Does it last for a few days and then evaporate the moment the anxiety of almost losing you fades? Or does it become a new baseline? That second one, the new baseline, is what tells you this wasn't just a fear response. This was an actual shift in how much they're willing to show up. I think this is a good place to address the thing I mentioned earlier, which is what it means if the only way they ever come back is because you reach out first. I want to be careful here, because I know some of you are going to hear this and feel a wave of anxiety, and I don't want that. I want you to hear this clearly instead. If every single reconnection in your relationship depends on you initiating it, that's not a neutral fact. That's information. It doesn't necessarily mean this person doesn't care about you at all, but it does mean you don't currently have evidence of the one sign we're talking about today, because the sign requires them to close the gap without you closing it for them first. And I'd rather you know that clearly than keep interpreting silence as depth of feeling, because those are not the same thing, and confusing them is what keeps so many women stuck in relationships that quietly drain them for years. Here's something else worth understanding, because I think it reframes this whole conversation in a useful way. Avoidant attachment isn't a fixed identity. It's a pattern that gets triggered under certain conditions and softens under others. The same person can behave in a more avoidant way with one partner and a noticeably less avoidant way with another, not because they've fundamentally changed as a person, but because something about the dynamic itself either amplifies or calms the fear that drives the withdrawal in the first place. This means the sign we're talking about today isn't just about them. It's also, indirectly, about the environment the relationship creates. Avoidant partners tend to move toward people on their own more easily when they don't feel chased, when they don't feel like every silence is going to be met with panic or pressure, and when they sense that you can tolerate some distance without falling apart. That doesn't mean you need to pretend you don't have needs, and it definitely doesn't mean you should silently accept whatever pace they want to set. It means that the specific sign we're discussing, the voluntary return with increased effort, tends to show up more often in relationships where the other person has enough emotional steadiness that closeness doesn't feel like a trap to the avoidant partner. I want to give you something practical here, because I don't like ending these conversations with just theory. If you're currently in a situation with someone who tends to pull away, and you're trying to figure out whether what you're seeing is the real sign or a false one, here's what I want you to actually track over the next month, not the next 3 days, because 3 days will lie to you. Track whether they initiate contact without a prompt from you, even small contact, not just big romantic gestures. Track whether the quality of their attention when they do show up is increasing or staying flat or decreasing over time. Track whether they ever acknowledge the distance at all, even clumsily, because acknowledgement, even imperfect acknowledgement, shows some level of self-awareness that a fully checked out person usually doesn't bother with. And track whether the pattern of pulling away and coming back is getting shorter and less intense over time, or whether it's getting longer and more painful. Those trend lines will tell you more than any single moment will. I also want to say something to the version of you who's watching this and already knows deep down that this sign isn't present in your relationship. Maybe you've been hoping it would show up eventually if you just gave it enough time, enough patience, enough understanding of their attachment style. I understand that hope, and I'm not going to tell you it's foolish to have felt it. But I also think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort right now. And the honest truth is that patience alone doesn't create this sign. It can create space for it, but it can't force it, because it's not something you can produce in someone else. It either exists inside them or it doesn't yet. And no amount of you shrinking your needs down to a size that feels safe for them is going to manufacture it if it isn't there. That's not me telling you to give up on someone the moment they go quiet for a weekend. Avoidant partners can absolutely learn to show up more consistently over time, especially in relationships where they feel safe rather than trapped. I've seen it happen many times, both in my own coaching and in the broader body of research on attachment and relationship repair. People are not frozen in whatever pattern they learned decades ago. But real change tends to show up exactly the way I described earlier, as a trend, not a single gesture. If you see the sign once and then years of the same disappointing pattern afterward, that one moment doesn't outweigh the pattern. The pattern is still the truest data you have. I think the reason this particular sign matters so much to talk about is that so much of the content out there in this space either tells you avoidants are hopeless and you should run immediately, or tells you if you just love them enough and give them enough space, they'll eventually come around. Both of those extremes are unhelpful, honestly, because they take away your ability to actually read what's happening in front of you. The truth sits in the middle, and it's less comforting than either extreme because it requires you to actually pay attention and think rather than following a rule. But it's also more accurate, and accuracy is what actually protects you from years of confusion. So if you're watching this and trying to figure out where you stand with someone right now, I want you to ask yourself honestly, not hopefully, honestly, when there's distance between us, who closes it? And when it gets closed, does it feel like more is being offered than before, or does it feel like just enough is being offered to keep things from ending? That distinction, more than almost anything else I could tell you, will tell you whether you're dealing with someone who's fighting their own fear to stay close to you or someone who's just quietly managing the relationship so it doesn't end on its own weight. I quote, I'll leave you with this. You are allowed to want consistency. You are allowed to want someone who doesn't just come back, but comes back and shows you it meant something. Understanding avoidant attachment isn't about lowering what you're willing to accept. It's about learning to read the real signals clearly enough that you're not mistaking silence for depth or fear for love, and that you can recognize it honestly and without illusion when someone is actually choosing you. If this helped you see your own situation a little more clearly, stay close, because there's more I want to walk you through about how these patterns shift over time and what it actually takes to build closeness with someone whose instinct is to pull away.